Foundation to discuss some of these blue and green economy initiatives in the region, and for each of you also to get to know a little bit more about the foundation and then follow up individually with the foundation members if you see that there is a strong link or connection with the work that you're doing and the work that the foundation is doing. So the way we're going to structure this presentation is we will first begin with 3 presentations from REDLAC members. We will first hear from Natalia Arango, who is the Executive Director of Fondo Acción, then from Leonardo Garcia, who is a Conservation Officer at Forever Costa Rica, and finally from Maria Jose Gonzalez, who is the Executive Director of the Mesoamerican Reef Fund. Each one of them will give us a presentation on some of the initiatives that these organizations are carrying out in terms of blue and green economy, and which can help give you a better feel of the type of work that conservation trust funds do. But at the same time, it's also a learning process for all of the REDLAC members to know what each one of the organizations is doing. Then we will hear from Catherine and Elizabeth from the DRK Foundation. And the idea is that we can end the meeting with an open discussion between all the participants. So this should be a highly participatory meeting. And once we move to the discussion part, I would like to ask you all to please raise your hands in the participants section if you wish to speak, and we will give you the floor. And if you're not speaking, we would ask that you all remain in mute so that we have better audio for everyone. So having said that, I would like to first give the floor to Natalia Arango, who will tell us a little bit about the work that Fondo Acción is doing in blue and green economy. Thank you, Natalia, and the floor is yours.
Hola, gracias. Thank you so much, Zdenka. Hola, colegas REDLAC. I'm pleased to meet you, Elizabeth and Natalie. I would very briefly go over the topics that we work on related with bioeconomy and green growth, and I'm gonna share my presentation. And again, REDLAC and Maria Luisa and Zdenka, thank you for organizing these meetings and webinars. I believe they're the reason that REDLAC exists. Please let me know if you can see my screen. Uh-oh.
See the back part.
I'm gonna stop sharing and then try again.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it?
I think it works. We can see the slides to there you go.
Okay.
No, it's perfect.
Okay, so I work with Fondo Acción. I've been with Fondo Acción for 10 years, 11 now. And we work in childhood and environment. We are a Colombian trust fund. We were created in year 2000 to operate Colombia's first debt for nature swap between the US and the Colombian government. Since then, we have grown to be a multi-donor platform or structure, and we've been investing in environment and childhood in with different strategies during these past 20 years. And I'm going to concentrate on the topics that are of interest for this webinar. And these are all motivated by 3 principles. We strongly believe and concentrate in working with sustainable financing opportunities. And as you all know, sustainable financing has been changing, and the meaning has been changing, and it has been growing to include more and more strategies under that same name. But we believe that the key is to integrate all components of society. And I believe us trust funds and in general, the environmental and childhood sectors and NGOs have been maybe not including all components of society. So we strongly believe in bringing together everyone under this efforts, under the efforts of working for the environment and children. And with a very strong emphasis on accountability, effectiveness, and efficiency. And that's the way where us as a third sector or the NGO sector can communicate more easily with other sectors, such as the corporate sector. So I would start basically describing in general terms what we do in rural development, in what we call sustainable rural development. And this is all work we do through grants. And I've chosen topics that I find more appropriate for the current circumstances. When we've been working for 20 years in rural development, but more on a local scale. But as we mature and grow and learn, now we're able to work with our partners to move these initiatives more for national and international markets. And I've chosen an example, a set of very interesting products that we're working with local communities. And basically, we start with the red pigment. It's called Bixia orellana. That's the scientific name. I believe the name in English is anato. And it is a very interesting line of development for rural communities because there's increasing demand for natural red pigment for the cosmetics and food industries. And we're currently working with them with the support of the Swiss government. And we have worked in the past in a similar, with the same sector, but with the natural blue pigment coming from a native plant that's called Genipa americana. And that's a tropical forest tree. And it produces the only natural blue pigment or dye. In most industrial processes for food and others, blue is achieved through chemical pigments or dyes. So this is very, very valuable because it has very interesting potential for worldwide markets. We worked with them with, again, grants from the GEF, and we provided grants to local communities, in particular Afro-Colombian communities that have collective territories, and they work for bringing benefits to the whole community. One that is, of course, present now for all of us, it's the acai palm tree. Its name is Euterpe oleracea. It's very common in Brazil and Bolivia, in the Amazon. And it has very interesting nutritious properties. It's deemed to be one of the plants that has the highest contents of antioxidants. So we're working with them, again, with grants from the UK and the US government for exporting purposes and for producing also a national market that connects rural communities of Afro-Colombian communities with big cities for gourmet restaurants. Of course, chocolate, we all work with chocolate and cocoa. We also work with grants with them, but now we're partnering with Acumen, which you know is an investment fund, to promote these activities that we have been funding through grants more into the market. And finally, we're starting it with circular economy projects in these coastal communities of the Pacific coast. So these are all examples of the work we do with grants, with local communities, connecting with markets, either Colombian markets or international markets. And in the last 10 years, we've been invested heavily in terms of effort. And we started with our colleagues here from Profonampe and Funbio in the world of RED and reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation. And what we learned in that project way back in 2010, one of the results of REDLAC, by the way, bringing funds together, we learned a lot from that first project. And now we are a key partner in the national and more key for the national market, but important in the international market that's producing carbon credits for the voluntary market, all coming from rural communities from the Pacific coast, again, Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities. And this work has allowed us to be part of a project portfolio, which in this first verification produced 6 million tons of reduced emissions. And we sold them, and we're still selling them on an average price of $4.5 per ton, which is set by the national market. And that national market is a result of the carbon tax. And it's just to illustrate how powerful it can be for a community or a set of communities, even at a low price like 4.5 dollars per ton, the amount of revenue that each community is getting from these sales. And they're all contracts with private sector who are interested in reducing their carbon tax, but also for the international market on corporate responsibility interests. And that led us to the establishment of forestry unit for carbon projects. So what we learned with these 8 projects, we're scaling up with new projects that are being designed, and we are getting calls from other communities that are interested in either the technical capacities, the administrative capacities, or the sales capacities that Fondo Acción is offering after the experience. So I thought it was very interesting for this conversation because the carbon market and the market that results from reduced emission projects is very interesting. And we've seen we've seen how it works and how it changes the dynamics of conservation in the country. And fondos ambientales trust funds can play a key role. And maybe one of the last things I want to talk about is our impact investment fund. It's called FIMI for its name in Spanish. It's a small investment fund, all dedicated for investment in Colombia. We invest in early and growth stages of enterprises in Colombia who work, of course, in mission-related investments. We find businesses that have development either in renewable energy, low carbon industries, education, information technologies, circular economy. Those are sort of that's an example of a set of sectors that we work with. We want them to also be innovative, sustainable, and scalable, and that they have an experienced team. We can invest in equity and also in debt, but we always keep our participation in the minority. We hold small participations when we go in with equity, and our ticket of investment is $470,000 per enterprise. And again, it's patient capital. We're active investments, so we plan to be there for 7 to 10 years and be able to, because we're looking at mission-related investments, bringing also not only financial resources, but also the experience of Fondo Acción in the areas where these enterprises are developing. And maybe the last example is how we want to bring together to this bioeconomy and green investments arena, the financial sector, because it's lacking in Colombia. So we're starting a $1.9 million project with resources from Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland to work with financial institutions to modernize their operations and prepare them for this green investment space, and design and implement incentives and financial tools for agroforestry and bioeconomy, and work with pilot projects. Currently focusing on 19 of Colombia's deforestation hotspots. So I don't want to take more time. If any other participants would like to learn more about what we're doing in either of these topics, I'll be happy to interact one-on-one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for your presentation. We will now give the floor to, the second one is, where we have next, Leonardo Garcia. Leonardo Garcia from Forever Costa Rica.
Hola, hola, buenos días. Good morning, everyone. My name is Leonardo Garcia. I am Program Officer at Forever Costa Rica Association. I would like to thank DRK Foundation and Redlac for this opportunity. It is my pleasure and honor to give you this presentation. I'm gonna share the screen. Please let me know if you see my presentation. Yep. All right, so I have prepared this short presentation about success projects with emphasis on local participation, indigenous communities, and governance management for conservation. First, okay, let me put here. First, let me please allow me to give you a briefing about Forever Costa Rica Association and tell you a little bit about the work that we do. As you can see, we are not a conventional NGO. We are an environmental fund that specializes on biodiversity conservation. We manage currently more than 90 million in US dollars in funds sourced by different programs. And even though we are relatively young, last year we celebrated our first 10th anniversary, we have an important role and position within Costa Rica's environmental sector. We have a public-private alliance with the government of Costa Rica, but we also have joint collaboration and projects with over 400 allies all over the country. We concentrate our efforts throughout Costa Rica in many topics, but two of the most relevant regard effective management of the system of protected areas and adaptation to climate change. And within this institutional frame, in the last years, we have given communities an important and active role. We overcome this old-styled, old-fashioned paradigm about fine and fences where communities were excluded in decision-making processes, and instead we integrate them in these processes and give them a role, a voice, and an active participation in these projects. As you can see here in the map, you're gonna find color dots. Each of these dots corresponds to locations where we have either finished or active conservation projects. Each dot might have different projects executed. And you can see the magnitude and scope of our work. We basically cover the whole country. But if you see the smaller circled area, we have action to beyond Costa Rica. That's the tropical Eastern Pacific area, and along with other equivalent environmental funds from Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador under this organization, this bigger organization by the name Pacific, we also tackle conservation projects concentrated on marine issues. So it has a tremendous impact and a large scope complemented to the work that we do here in Costa Rica. Over here, you can see the four legs that support our structure, the resources that we manage. We have three main programs for every Costa Rica Trust Fund that concentrate on marine and coastal projects. Then we have the second debt for nature swap between the governments of the United States and Costa Rica that develops projects within the system of protected areas. And we also have the first debt for nature swap between those governments too that develops projects outside the system of protected areas, focusing on livelihood and sustainable opportunities to the communities living near these areas. And we also have several complementary programs that sum up to $14 million in funds. So all these programs all together, they sum more than $90 million in resources for conservation. For today, I have prepared three examples of projects where local participation and local engagement is quite important. The first one, it's the creation of 4 marine management areas, and you're gonna see the blue areas all around the map. We have been a key actor in these processes, working along with the government and working with the communities that live inside or near these areas. So we have collaborated to increase the marine protected area coverage by 11,100 square kilometers, which is equivalent to 4,300 square miles. And that's something big because we have changed Costa Rica's official map of conservation protected areas. That was an effort that took several years. It was not an easy task, but the results are evident. Communities are now developing different initiatives for, on one side, for the conservation of the biodiversity, but on the other side, to promote sustainable productive activities. All these processes were executed with close collaboration with the government, as I'm telling you, but with other institutional allies. Um, and I would say that the special ingredient, the secret sauce, was the active engagement of these communities, because they live there. Historically, they have taken advantage of the different resources found in these areas. And with the work, the joint work and collaboration with all these allies, we came up with some solutions, blue economy and green economy solutions and alternatives for these communities. Definitely the development of the scientific data and the technical studies are important, but even more important is the social consensus, the social processes that were developed there. We had to we have to organize multiple sessions, meetings, field trips. It was a difficult process, but at the end, communities and the government sat on the table and they came up with important consensus on how to manage these sites and the biodiversity that they protect. So governance systems were created where these inhabitants have official representation on the management decisions. For example, we are now working with almost 20 communities living near these areas, and we are promoting different ventures. For example, sustainable fishing is quite important in this part, in all these sites of Costa Rica. Tourism is an important enterprise as well. And we are working and supporting a sort of a local Airbnb-based network of family accommodation, where the local inhabitants, they promote visitation, tourism visitation, and they offer accommodation to either local or foreign visitors to these beautiful parts of Costa Rica. We are working on creating new marine protected areas, and these processes are currently going on. The second example that I would like to elaborate goes to the southern Pacific of Costa Rica, in this case in the Osa Conservation Area, where we took the lessons learned from a previous United States Fish and Wildlife Service that implemented a project, a similar project with children. But in this case, we targeted young people living in these communities, and we created a network of volunteers that might provide support and collaboration to the park rangers in their daily tasks. So this project had an emphasis, a strong emphasis on leadership and active participation, and it developed a strong capacity building program where these young people took several courses on various topics like first aid and emergency care, soft skills, management of protected areas, use and management of natural resources. And they also had a 20-hour supervised practice in some of the private enterprises found around these sites. The initiative is expected to be consolidated in the system of protected areas, and we hope other conservation areas replicate this effort. One of the values or one of the most important results of this project that we achieve is that two of the women that work as volunteers have recently been hired on an interim basis to work with SINAC, which is the system of protected areas in Costa Rica. And three other men were hired by a local private company on the tourism sector on a permanent position. So this program is paying off, and it's bringing on some of the interesting results of the initiative. And last but not least, this is a project that is currently under execution. It's being developed in 4 indigenous territories in La Amistad International Park, which is a huge patch of forest in southern Costa Rica. In these sites, we have several issues regarding poaching and natural resource extraction. So we approach these indigenous territories, and we are trying to promote sustainable practices that might protect and conserve the biodiversity found in these sites. So we're striving to bring together 3 important elements: the cosmovision of these indigenous people, the way they see and the way they treat biodiversity, the effective practices of biodiversity conservation from all these learning process that we have achieved throughout the years, and the sustainable use of these resources. So the idea is that these people respect the natural resources, but at the same time might integrate into productive activities that conserve and protect this natural capital. So this project and all the projects, all the other projects that we have developed, takes a big relevance because some of these productive activities are carried out from the use of ecosystem goods and services. So the idea is that we provide sustainability approaches so that we can have these resources for many years in the coming future. Over here in the slide, you can see some of the key elements and topics that we have learned throughout this years, and definitely we encourage processes that provide the technical elements required for an informed decision making. And this is quite important because it's an art, but it's a science too, and we try to convene votes for the development of these projects. And based on this information, it is possible to analyze the state of all these resources and then promote and provide the support for sustainable use of ecosystem services. So all these that you see on the slide are examples of other projects that we are executing. Some of these are applicable to the 3 cases that I just presented. And of course, all this is achieved through participatory governance systems where, again, the communities have an active role and an active position to take these decisions. I'll be more than glad to help you out with any question that you may have later on this conversation. And thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Leo. We will now have the presentation by Maria Jose Gonzalez before we open it up for questions.
Hello, thank you, and great to be here. Thanks again for the invitation. It's great to meet you, Elizabeth and Natalie, and great to see so many friends from Red Lac. We miss having a meeting, right? So I'll start quickly. I'll stop my video and give me a second and share my screen. Can you see it?
We can see it, but it's not in presentation form.
Really, I don't know why. It should be. Let me see if this works better. Is that better? Ah, perfect. Okay, thank you. So I work for the Mesoamerican Reef Fund, which is a regional environmental fund that was established to support, and now I can't make the slides move forward. Let me see. I don't know why it's not operating.
Maria Jose, you can go to the bottom left and you should see.
There you are. Thank you. Yes, got it. Thank you, Maria Lisa. There we go. Thanks. So Marfan was established to support conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of resources in the Mesoamerican Reef ecoregion, shared between Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. And for some time now, we have been supporting alternative income projects focused on community initiatives along the 4 countries. Mostly, these initiatives have so far have come from the community development strategies that have been carried out by the managers and co-managers of protected areas that we partnered with on the ground. Most of the projects we supported have had feasibility studies, and we have provided funding through grants. These grants have come from different channels within MARFund, and in some instances, in addition, to the initial grant for a project, we have provided other grants as they have grown, and we've seen that they are advancing and they need new support. The support has included from very startup organizations where the first support is to help them get structured and registered legally as an organization. Much of the support goes to organizational strengthening, for example, better board operation, basic administration and accounting, and some grants go to technical support and follow-up for the specific topic they're developing. And we have also contributed some of the equipment they require for the activities they are carrying out. Many of the activities have focused on income from tourism. So most of these projects have been affected by the pandemic. In a quick follow-up to all of our partners late last year, they are all very eager to continue with their projects, so they all continue to stay together as groups, which is very important. And many are starting to gear up for hopefully advances this new year. I just want to go quickly over some of the projects that we have funded in the region, and I'll go through them through the pictures. This project up here is being developed in southern Belize by a co-managing partner called Tide. And they have 2, let's say, productive or market activities, Tide Tours and the Ridge to Reef Initiative. The Tide Tours is like their business arm, and it's been developed for several years. It's been established for several years. They operate well, and they have now linked it to the Ridge to Reef, which is a volunteer program where volunteers pay to come to this part of Belize to help Tide carry out the research, monitoring, and environmental education activities. So part of the support provided in this case was to strengthen their infrastructure, to receive the volunteers. And for example, here they have solar panels for electricity in these installations. Another project has been, this is called Apicor, and this is a group of women that are beekeepers, and they do honey production, and they've expanded to include other products that with honey, such as shampoo and soaps and cream. They do a great job. They actually incremented their honey production in 2020. However, their market dropped a bit, again, due to the pandemic. Their sales currently are in Roatan through hotels and shops. So they were also affected a bit, but they have continued to grow, and they maintained their group, and they have maintained and grown their beehives, which is very good. Another example of a project down here, this is called Beach Trap Pesca Tours. This is a project that is being developed in Sarteneja in northern Belize. And there is a group of fishermen in Belize that use these traps. They are the only ones that apply these traps in Belize. And they organize themselves to attract tourism to see how they fish in this particular manner, and then show them the astonishing sights around Sarteneja. It is one of the most beautiful places in the Mesoamerican Reef region. And they're working, it's actually a whole family project. Fishermen take out the groups to see how they fish this way, but then they come back to their houses and have a meal there. So, women have been trained in hospitality and in hygiene and how to prepare these typical meals. And another project I want to showcase is this one. This one is from Guatemala. This is a community cafeteria along Rio Sarstún in Guatemala. And this one was developed by a group of fishermen, an association of fishermen, and it is the fishermen that are actually in charge of the cafeteria. They prepare the food, they carry out everything. This group has continued to operate all throughout last year, maybe at a slower pace, but they have been open, attending locals. All of the projects, of course, are wishing and are preparing, hopefully, for opening up slowly this year. And of course, they're taking into consideration all the biosecurity measures that they need if they are attending tourism. For example, this group, the volunteer group in Southern Belize. So we have supported groups of different sizes in the 4 countries, you know, several community groups, for example, in the protected area called the Manatee Sanctuary in southern Quintana Roo. And now we are beginning to structure a new initiative with the Summit Foundation. We're thinking through this together. We have found that there is a very, very big gap regarding support for women's market activities along the coastal communities, basically in the whole region. And this is a stark difference for what happens for women's community groups inland or in the highlands. And of course, there's always need for more support. But you see that, for example, Honduras and Guatemala there are groups that are dedicated to supporting women. This is not happening so much along the coastal communities of the Mesoamerican Reef. So we are beginning to work on this gap to determine how we can focus on women with market projects that support conservation and sustainable use of resources in the Mesoamerican Reef. And we're carrying out initial scoping of projects. All the pictures here that you see here are ongoing projects that we have supported previously. They're all women's groups. This one right here is part of the honey production in Roatan. And these are, you know, from Belize and Mexico and other parts of Honduras. We're trying to work with them and see if we can scale some of these projects up and hopefully attract other participants that help us support these women, you know, to strengthen them, to make them independent, make them resilient, right, to climate change, be able to be adaptable to the situation that is very, very, let's say, very drastic along the coast of these coastal communities. We're looking forward also to attract down the line impact investors that can help them grow even more. So this is, like, in a nutshell what we are working at, and this is our new initiative with this focus on women. And I'll be happy to respond to any questions that may come up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria Jose. Thank you to Natalia, Leo, and Maria Jose for sharing just a glimpse of some of the activities carried out by conservation trust funds, which, as you can see, you know, go all the way from very large projects like the projects that Natalia presented with the carbon markets, which are multi-million-dollar projects, to very small community-based initiatives that can really make a difference at a very local scale. So the idea was just to give you a glimpse of some of these projects and for all of us to learn a little bit about what the other funds are doing. I would now like to ask Elizabeth and Natalie to share their information on the DRK Foundation before we open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Zdenka. Y otra vez, muchas gracias a todos. Es un honor estar aquí. Buenas tardes, buenos días. Give me 1 second, I'll share my screen and look forward to introducing DRK. Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Great, thanks for the thumbs up. Excellent, well, thank you again so much for having us. We have sort of 3 things that we're excited to work through today with you all. The first one we're already really inspired to get to know the activities of Red Lock and some of the members of Red Lock. So thank you again so much for sharing this very inspiring variety of projects that I think it's just I'm very energized to see the range of exciting work, both on the conservation front and on the human livelihoods front that you all are taking on. As far as what we'd love to share out today, we'll give you all a better sense of who we are at DRK, the types of organizations that we fund, and how to send ideas our way, since we definitely would welcome ideas from this group about promising early stage organizations in Latin America that might benefit from our support. And then we'll share a few lessons learned from working with our environmental portfolio over the last few years. I will take the first section, and then I will hand it off to Natalie for the second. And I will address questions about our funding parameters before I hand off to Natalie. So first, a quick primer on who DRK is. We are headquartered in the US, in the Bay Area in California and in Boston, but we have a global footprint. And we're rooted in venture capital. Our founders were successful business partners in the venture capital industry, and they wanted to bring that idea of early stage risk capital to the social impact sector. And we got started not quite 20 years ago. So that was a pretty new concept at the time. Impact investment, for example, was a very nascent conversation in the impact sector. So we were, I think, among the first to practice this idea of venture philanthropy, which is really what we call the model. And essentially what we do is we find, fund, and support social impact startups. So rather than having specific issue areas or program areas the way many foundations do, our focus is actually on stage and in supporting organizations that are at an early stage with a big idea to grow regionally or even globally. So you see the second point here kind of ties into that. Our mandate is really to support organizations that have a vision to scale their work widely. We are so admiring of the many organizations that do amazing work in their communities and that choose to stay focused on their communities. However, our mandate is really around supporting organizations that have plans to grow significantly. And importantly to note, which is also inspired by venture, we raise external funds to support our work. So we are not strictly a family foundation or family office or anything like that with just the support of Draper Richards and Kaplan, although of course they're important supporters of our team and our work. We actually raise external funds to do what we do. And here's where we begin to sort of depart from venture capital. We are philanthropically funded. So our external partners are donor partners, they're not investors. As such, our mandate is 100% around the mission and the social impact of what we do. We don't have any kind of mandate or incentive to generate a financial return. And so as such, we're 100% mission first. So you can think of us in many ways as similar to impact investors, given that focus on scalability. We have a focus on innovation, and we are looking as often as possible to see sustainable business models in the organizations we fund. But when you really come down to it, we do prioritize mission over financial returns, and we'll talk more about that as we go. To quickly share the basics of our support model itself. So growth capital is of course an important part of it. And again, we work with early stage organizations. As such, our ticket size is not the biggest on the block, but we do hope that it's really critical at the stage our organizations work. And our ticket size is US $300,000 over 3 years. That's consistent for all the organizations we work with. We like to keep things simple, and we like everyone to be on an even playing field. And the type of capital we deploy is mostly grant funding. We do not place restrictions on our grants. We strongly believe that unrestricted general operating support is very critical for nonprofits in those early stages. And then about 20% of our portfolio are structured as for-profit entities or hybrids. And in those cases, we tend to do debt to equity or equity investments simply to respect their status as for-profits. Again, not because we have any specific mandate to generate a financial return for our fund. The other key prong of our support is really, it's about the scaling support and the human capital we bring to our work. So we have an entire core of team members, and Natalie is one of them and can talk more about this, who serve on the board of every organization that we fund for a period of 3 years. And the idea here is to be super hands-on and really in the trenches with our social entrepreneurs, deeply supporting them so that they can scale their organizations faster and more successfully and with even greater impact. So we have 6 key pillars or practice areas that we really tend to focus on with our portfolio. Board development, for example, is a big one. So often we're the first sort of non-friends and family member joining the board, and we're really hoping to bring it to the next level of a more of a highly strategic board that will grow with the organization. Leadership capacity, working directly with the founders to help build the leadership skills they need to run a successful startup organization and scale it. Business model, scaling strategy, and a number of other things. And so, and we have several members of our team who, rather than working with specific organizations in our portfolio, are functional experts on certain areas here, and they pitch in as needed as well alongside our director team. As far as what we're looking for and our decision-making process, early stage is one important parameter, and ambitious growth plans are another important parameter. So we're really looking for a few key things in the organizations that we're seeking to fund. First of all, we hope that all of our organizations are addressing a big problem. Some of our organizations are very much on sort of the social impact side of things. Others are very much on the environmental impact. Many have a blended impact. And I would argue that social and environmental impact are sort of one and the same in a lot of ways. But in any case, all of our organizations tackle a big global problem, a globally scaled issue that we're all facing. They're bringing some kind of innovation to the field as well, and they're seeing very strong impact. So we do work with organizations that have a growing evidence base for the impact that they're having. And we look for that impact to be aligned to kind of the root cause of the problem that they're tackling. We're looking for potential to scale significantly as well. One piece of that is the entrepreneur's ambitions to scale. And another is, how is the model designed and aligned to the ability to scale significantly? That can mean a lot of different things in different sectors and when tackling different problems. But really what we're hoping for is that our organizations will potentially move the needle on the problem that they're trying to solve. True to our venture roots, we also get to know our entrepreneurs and their teams very closely, since we believe that the founding leaders of an organization really have so much influence on the trajectory of that organization. And then lastly, we have, of course, limited bets to make. And so we want to make sure that we can really add value at the time that we join, and that the founding team is excited to bring us on as very active partners. A couple notes about how we think about scale, since we use this word scalability a lot in conversation and in our evaluation process. And it's a conversation we've really been having quite a bit internally over the last few years, especially how we think about scale in an environmental context. This has been, I would say, candidly, a bit tricky for us to figure out what is our benchmark or what are we aiming for in the trajectory of these organizations we're supporting. And so we've done a bit of homework and thinking and analysis over the last year or two to come up with a couple of benchmarks, not really end goals for our organizations, but levels of impact that we're hoping to see within 3 to 5 years of DRK funding these organizations. It's not intended to be a floor or a ceiling, but really just as a signal of a steep upward trajectory. And so we're hoping our organizations will go much further than this, but we want to sort of see those early signs that there's escape velocity, if you will. So some of our organizations' key metrics are around CO2 emissions reductions or equivalent. So we have a benchmark of 100,000 tons reduced within that early period. If it's waste reduction that they're really tackling, then similarly 100,000 tons of waste reduced. And then where there's a social impact, and this is true of many, many of the organizations we fund, then we would hope to see 10,000 or more lives meaningfully impacted in those early years. And again, that's not because those numbers are super magical in their own, in their own way, but really just to make sure that we have a consistent way for our team to align on what we're hoping to see in those first few years. And if we see a prospect for one or more of these metrics to be met, then we're really going to get pretty interested. I would note also that we're working on a similar metric for acreage, especially as we think about potentially investing in regenerative agriculture or other land-based interventions. But we're really still refining that one. So not ready to put it on the page yet, and definitely interested in this group's wisdom around that as well. Finally, I'd love to just share a little bit more on the process front. So each year, we aim to make about 5 to 6 new environmental grants or investments. So it is a pretty limited number. We invest a lot in our decision-making process to make sure that we're coming in when we can have the most impact. But we are very, very open to leads and from communities like this one, who really are on the ground, seeing innovations out there, seeing great leaders, and connecting them with potential resources. So we welcome any and all ideas, and we want to be extra accessible to folks coming to us through the Red Lock Network. So our formal process starts with a short online application. It's on our website. We can certainly circulate that, or I'll be able to put it in the chat. Equally, Natalie and I are happy to be accessible by email to you all if you have ideas you'd like to run by us, or organizations that would potentially like to put themselves forward. So again, our goal really is to be extra accessible, and our process is a rolling process. So it's open all year. We make 20 to 25 grants or investments in total each year. And again, our target for environmental organizations is around 5 to 6, since on a portfolio basis, we like to keep a pretty healthy mix of issue areas represented in our portfolio. So I am ready to turn it over to Natalie, who will share some more color on the environmental organizations in our portfolio and some of the trends we've been seeing. But before I do that, I've seen some activity in the chat that I wasn't able to read along with. And so I'm happy to open it up to any sort of procedural questions around how organizations can reach us, or questions about our parameters and an investment mandate.
Yes, maybe Elizabeth, just looking through the questions, some of them are more for the discussion, I believe, the one from Anton, but specific questions made on your presentation directly. From Rosa in Panama is, could you share the metrics you use for agriculture and land? I think you answered that after Rosa put the question, but if you want to explain a little bit more about that. And then there's a question from Natalia about whether you invest outside the USA. So maybe your geographic priorities.
Yes, thank you. Great reminder. Should have included that here. We absolutely invest outside the US. And part of our team is scattered outside the US as well. So we do have a global footprint. Latin America is very much a part of our scope, which is what excites us to be here today. Over time, our portfolio has generally been about 50% US, 50% outside the US, with a mix of Latin America, Africa, and India primarily when we're talking about outside the US. And then on agriculture, as I mentioned, we're still kind of cooking up the right benchmark, but we're working on that. And again, would really welcome any input. So shall I hand it? Thanks, Adenka, for going through there. Shall I hand it over to Natalie?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So I thought what would be helpful is to share a little bit, a few examples actually from our portfolio. And I think they dovetail pretty nicely with some of the examples that you've also shared. So Komaza is working on the issue of deforestation in Africa. So the use of forestry products, which is outstripping the ability to replant and recreate regenerative agricultural practices. They work with smallholder farmers. And so their impact impact is dual. It's both in terms of environmental, but also in terms of providing sustainable livelihoods as well. The Rainforest Connection is an organization I had the pleasure of being on the board with, and they working mostly in Brazil and Peru. And what they do is they use cell phone technology to essentially provide acoustic information to track and pinpoint illegal logging and other activity in protected forests. And the rangers in these forests have to cover large quantities, large territories, and they can't always be on the ground. And so having this acoustic monitoring helps them pinpoint illegal activity and intervene to stop that activity. And then we have other organizations that are really working on this idea of difficult information to obtain. So Adventure Scientists recruits volunteers to go out and collect information essentially for scientists and other agencies to be able to get the useful information that they need to continue their research. And so those are some examples of organizations that have been in our portfolio. What Time and Flywire are really data-driven organizations. What Time enables consumers to choose when to power their electrical needs by telling them when it's less, when the electricity they're consuming is cleaner. And so that's really about tapping into the power of data to be able to make decisions that have environmental consequences. And similarly, Flywire is a set of technology that can be installed on fishing vessels that help them track the sustainability of their catch in a lower cost manner, and helps the fishing industry be more in line with sustainable fishing practices. And that was an organization that Elizabeth was instrumental in bringing into the portfolio, and just came into the portfolio very recently. So I thought we would share a couple of things that we've learned. And I would say, you know, we are not sector experts. We are sector agnostic, and we are stage specific. So we look at organizations and we try to understand that we try to understand the problem that they're addressing and their potential to scale their work and address that problem. But essentially we are accompanying them, and we are stage specific. So we do early stage, 2 to 3 years in age, half a million or so in budget. We're agnostic as to whether they're for-profit or non-profit. But we believe that the entrepreneurs that we work with know a lot more about the field and the issue that they're addressing than we do. And we believe that our role is to help them scale the impact of their work. And so I'd say one of the things that we've found, like the examples a lot of you shared today, is that in many situations, the environmental impact is coupled with the social impact for some of the organizations that we're seeing. So for example, Katie, which we hadn't talked about, but Katie is an India-based organization that's helping small-scale farmers use greenhouses to increase their yields, but also sort of protect them against the environmental effects of farming, including lower consumption of water and less use of pesticides. And so in that case, we have both an environmental impact and a social impact in terms of increasing livelihoods for farmers. That's also true, I'd say, of Kamasa and some of our other organizations like Greenwave. Greenwave helps kelp farmers start up kelp farming in the coasts, and it's essentially a training program, but we also connect farmers with users of kelp. Increasingly, kelp is used in all kinds of really interesting products like bioplastics, fertilizer, feedstock for animals, and actually food for humans as well. And so in that case, Greenwave is displacing potentially agricultural sources of food and using the ocean as a new source of farming. But because it's a zero input process, you don't need to fertilize or water kelp. It's in the ocean. And kelp also sequesters carbon and nitrogen. There's a tremendous environmental impact to growing kelp, as well as a livelihood to being a kelp farmer. Some of the other things that we've reflected on is the power of data and using data to drive either consumer behavior or to monitor behavior that increases positive environmental consequences. And so this notion of data is one theme that we've seen across a lot of our organizations, and is something that is fairly scalable. So, you know, the ability to use and leverage data to drive environmental change is something that we've seen across a number of organizations in our portfolio that we've listed here on this slide as well. A lot of our organizations are, well, we have both nonprofit and for-profit organizations, but where we've seen some real traction is when these organizations have some form of revenue generation that helps sustain the business. And so we've seen in a number of organizations, even if they are nonprofit, that they have some kind of mechanism to generate revenues that increases their sustainability in the long run. Replate is an organization both Elizabeth and I worked on, and they collect food that is from companies that provide meals for their employees that is not used, and they have a process for picking that food up and redistributing to people from underserved communities that might not have access to food. And their revenue model is actually to charge companies to be able to take that food from them and to repurpose that food. And other organizations here also have a revenue generation as part of their model, even if they are nonprofits. And that may not be possible in all geographies. I know that there are some restrictions in different geographies around the ability of nonprofits to generate revenues, but it is something that we've seen that adds to the resilience of the organizations that we work with.
And one thing I'd add on this topic is our use of the word diversified here was really intentional, because we didn't aim to suggest that, you know, earned revenue or a for-profit business model is should be always be at the center or is the holy grail. So to give an example, Replate actually, while they have a strong earned revenue model, they also have a grant and donor base. And when COVID hit, that was really critical for them to be able to pivot quickly to working with new food donors, because their original food donors were corporates who were no longer going into the office. So if they had only had the earned revenue stream, ironically, COVID would have been even more challenging for them, but they had some grant funders that they could go lean on to respond quickly to the crisis. So just wanted to underscore that, you know, yes, we think it's great when there's a business model embedded, and it's great to make the most of that. But we also see a very important role for philanthropy and more patient funders, which really is exactly why we're here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's great. So, you know, I think we had a really great question about the metrics that we use, and we do struggle a little bit with understanding that from an environmental portfolio perspective. We've seen some really interesting waste reduction and circular economy organizations that we support. And we also, you know, on the other sort of scale, have looked at organizations that are really connected to reducing emissions, either through clean energy production or solar product distribution of solar products in different markets. And so I think, you know, we're totally open to assessing impact. But I'd say what we look for is organizations that are focused on large problems, that have some kind of innovation that they're bringing to the fore, that have a pilot that demonstrates the potential for impact, and then a pathway or some kind of line of sight to being able to scale the work and the impact pretty substantially, and making a real dent in the problem that they're addressing. Elizabeth, do you want to take this one?
Sure, happy to. This is our last page, by the way, so I just wanted to kind of wrap our share out on a high note. But we spend a lot of time with funders across all different issue areas, not just environment. And those of us within the DRK team who spend a lot of our time in environment, as Natalie and I do, are increasingly optimistic about the attention that climate and environment are getting from global funders. We're seeing momentum and growing visibility of the issue area, as well as an increased recognition from funders who maybe didn't traditionally fund in quote unquote environment or climate, that they need to begin doing so in order to actually achieve the social impact goals they have. So to share a couple of examples, DRK Foundation, who is a collaborator of ours, has indicated that they're planning to add a climate lens to all their grant-making decisions. So regardless of whether the organization is explicitly focused on climate change or environmental conservation, they still have to kind of run through an environmental filter to make sure that they are aligned with positive climate impact. Our research from Environmental Grant Makers Association shows that philanthropic funding in climate has been growing. It is off a low base. We know that environmental has been underrepresented in the past, but again, our research and what we see anecdotally also suggests that it's increasing. And then again, on the right-hand side of this slide, you see one more example. This organization, SIF, is really focused on childhood well-being, but we have recently learned that they're including climate mitigation in their activities now because they have come to the conclusion that in order to have the impact they hope to have on childhood well-being, they can't ignore the climate issue. And so that makes us optimistic for the future of philanthropic funding in climate and for the possibilities of collaborating, not just across philanthropy or across impact investors, but across different issue areas as well, and a growing recognition that climate really does intersect with all social impact goals.
So there's a couple of questions in the chat. I'm happy to take a shot at some of those. One of the questions was experience in the marine environment, and so I think we have a number of organizations that are looking at sustainable fishing and promoting sustainable fishing, and also kelp farming. So those are some examples of sort of blue economy initiatives. We do not fund government programs. We're really focused on funding both for-profit and non-profit organizations that are early stage. So, you know, our sweet spot is around three years of age, but we are also open to organizations that are in a strategic pivot point. So they could be a little bit later stage or a little bit older, but they are for some reason in this moment of shifting their model or pivoting their model to much greater scale. So I think you know, the issue isn't so much the age of the organization, but where they are in their organizational life cycle, and where we might be able to help in terms of scaling their work. Any other questions?
Yes, I
or?
think there was a question, Natalie, about from Anton Williams from Peru. He was saying, is it possible for DRK to join a biodiversity facility? From the information, it seems that they look more into the beneficiaries of some of our larger projects. Probably we could team together in the different stages of a social environmental startup cycle. I don't know, Anton, if you want to add something there, or Natalie, if you want to take a stab at that.
No, probably stop at that, Zdenka, because if you require further information, I will glad. But for instance, in Peru, we are developing a biodiversity facility fund, which will provide this kind of funding for social and environmental startups. No, that at the very beginning there are more like mission oriented, but in the larger scale of time, they need to be also financial. They have to break even on the financial dimension of the business. So I was wondering, because since we are starting, if there is a kind of roadmap to work together or to join efforts. No, for instance. Probably some of the funds, as Profonamp or others in this meeting, are focusing more on the early stages, and then we can join with institutions like the foundation you represent to go to the next stages of these startups and stuff like that.
I think that's exactly right. I think, you know, we work with a lot of different incubators, and we really view ourselves as sort of post pilot and just at the beginning stage of scale. So we would love to have partnerships with organizations who are supporting the very early stage organizations, and then you know, if they sort of meet some of our parameters around scale and innovation, we would be delighted. We're very good sort of second funders from that sort of incubation. Yeah.
And I'm going to drop our website and our email addresses in the chat. Also happy for Zdenka and her team to circulate this again later on, but just want to make sure we're accessible. I also saw a question about whether we fund in the Caribbean, and we are open to. Candidly, I don't think that we have before, which is not a reflection of our desires or our parameters, but more probably of our networks, and that historically we haven't had the deepest of networks in the Caribbean, but we would be open to it. With the, you know, the thing I would say is that we're not going to be the regional experts in that case. We're very happy to bring our experience with scaling, our pattern recognition around what it takes to scale an innovative nonprofit or social enterprise, as well as our networks globally. But I certainly wouldn't want to be mistaken for a Caribbean expert. That's not where a lot of our portfolio is, but we're certainly open to it.
Going back to the questions at the beginning, I just wanted to make sure we circle back, because I know you're also interested in learning from us. So it would be really useful if Natalia and Maria Jose could each share just in 2 minutes some of the biggest challenges their organizations also face in trying to put together some of these startups, because I think it would be useful for you. And I know we're running out of time, but as you can see, there's a lot we can continue to discuss. 1 hour and a half wasn't enough, it seems. So I don't know, Maria Jose, Natalia, if you could explain in, you know, each one in 3 minutes, this is Manuel's question, the challenges in this type of work that you're doing. We could start with Natalia.
Okay, thank you. For our investment fund, for our mission investment fund, the biggest challenge was building a pipeline. Businesses are not necessarily ready for our fund. There's a lot of startups and ideas, but we are looking for a bit more mature businesses. And I guess In the market, in the carbon market area, our biggest challenge was the uncertainty of the government with regulations regarding the peace agreement, the Paris Agreement, which brought a lot of uncertainty for projects. We're sort of overcoming the uncertainty. And the other thing is, and I know Manuel, you know them well, the carbon cowboys generate a lot of chaos. And finally, for our products, for experts, access to markets, and being able to overcome or to be able to comply with all regulations is a challenge. So I would say that comes to mind.
That's super helpful, Natalia. And it might be worth another conversation, kind of one-on-one, to hear more about the stage of organizations you're seeing that aren't ready for your fund, because it may be that we're a stage before you and can be helpful with that, but it would be great to explore more.
Yeah, I have a handful, or maybe two. So,
excellent.
My pleasure.
Phenomenal.
Okay, Maria Jose, do you want to share a few thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the problems in the region is also actually creating strong projects that can attract private capital to the region. We know for now the ones we're working with are relatively small, but we're thinking, maybe bundling them together. And we know that they do require close follow-up with technical assistance. That is something that is key. And we're seeing how we can position ourselves to actually attract this funding to help them grow strong and then bring in that external capital.
Okay, well, it seems like we're running out of time here, which is very unfortunate because I think we're just starting. It's starting to get interesting now and sharing some ideas back and forth. We can definitely follow up with all of you. As you can see, we have a whole group of organizations with a lot of experience working from very small scale to very large scale projects and through different geographies. So I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities to learn, and also for all of you member funds to connect directly with Elizabeth and Natalie with ideas that might have spurred up. I was chatting privately with some of you and saying, oh, I think, this project might work for you, or this other project. So maybe you can also follow up directly with them, and we can follow up with another call just on sharing some of these experiences. But now at least we got to know each other a little better. With 26 countries represented here, I think we had around 15 on this call today. So thank you for offering this opportunity to learn more about these potential windows that might be useful for the beneficiaries or some of our conservation trust funds. And thank you to Natalia, to Leo, and to Maria Jose for sharing their experiences. And now, Elizabeth, I leave it to you and Natalie for the last words.
Well, I was going to say thank you right back. Thank you all so much for the opportunity, and so many follow-up questions I have for our presenters, as well as a real desire to get to know the rest of the group as well. So as I put our email addresses in the chat. We want to be super accessible. So Zdenka, feel free to circulate for folks who want to have follow-up conversations, and certainly welcome the chance to follow up if it makes sense to dig deeper at a later date.
Great.
I would just add a lot of gratitude to all of you for doing the work that you're doing. It's so important and so inspiring. I really enjoyed learning from some of you about the work that you're doing, and muchas gracias, and good luck, and hold the course, because this work is so vital to both us all and our future generations.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and we'll be in touch soon.